All right, this video is for Module 18 on aggregate supply. So this is the beginning part of aggregate supply with short-run aggregate supply. So aggregate supply as a whole is the quantity of output that is supplied at various aggregate price levels. Remember, aggregate price levels is we're just talking about price indexes. So as the price index, as prices generally rise, what happens to the amount that is offered for sale as a whole for all businesses, okay? Because remember, we're talking about aggregate and not just regular old supply. Now, what you will find is that there are two types of aggregate supply. So there is short-run aggregate supply and there's long-run aggregate supply. So for short-run aggregate supply, the aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, similar to when we talked about the regular old supply curve. So it actually looks like this. So it looks really similar to supply. The difference is obviously being that the x-axis is now labeled real GDP and the y-axis is labeled aggregate price level. So that's, very similar. And then you'll notice that our curve is not just labeled aggregate supply, but it's actually labeled short-run aggregate supply, SRAS. So yes, I know it's a mouthful, but we do have to label it that way because there is such a thing as long-run aggregate supply, so we have to be careful. But in this video, we're just talking about short-run. So in the short run, what happens is that the question is, why is it upward sloping? So we know why it's upward sloping with a regular old supply curve, but why is it upward sloping with a short-run aggregate supply curve? Well, in the short run, what happens is that wages are considered what we call sticky wages. They're going to be sticky costs, and these are ones that can't change in the short run because of contracts. So employees are going to sign these contracts and expect that same wage for a certain set amount of time, depending upon how long is specified in the contract. For me personally, I'm obviously going to be under contract to teach at Chittard for a year. Right? Other employees, they may have contracts that last other varying lengths of time. But even if you don't sign a contract, you're like, well, I work at McDonald's, I'm not signing a contract. Yes, but there's an understanding. Okay, there's an understanding that you expect that you know what your wage is going to be in the near future. Now, they can renegotiate and they can tell you that your wage is changing, whether up or down, but they have to give you some lead time to let you know that. So in the short run, wages are sticky, so you can't really adjust them. So in the short run, what happens is that when price level increases, okay, it's going to increase the profits, because what happens is that our input costs are fixed, our wages are sticky. So as a result, the aggregate supply is going to increase. Think about it this way. As the price level is increased, and maybe we start at a price level where we're making a profit of, say, $100,000, right? And our wages, let's just make the assumption that our wages are only input costs. So our wages are maybe $40,000. So as a result, we make a profit of $60,000. We have a revenue of $100,000. Our wages cost $40,000. We're assuming there's no other costs. It's $60,000 in profit. That's not bad. But maybe as the price level increases, maybe all of a sudden we're getting a revenue of $150,000. Remember, in the short run, our input costs, our wages can't change, so they're stuck at $40,000. So now, oh my gosh, we're making $90,000 in profit. That's awesome. So heck yeah, when the price level goes up, I'm going to be willing to supply more. That's why the short-run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping. All right. Next, we're going to be taking a look at what causes the aggregate supply curve to move. So in class, we are going to be doing this. So we're going to be actually adding this to your graphing section. Notice that there are only 3 factors that cause a change in short-run aggregate supply. But do notice that the short-run aggregate supply curve looks like this. And so when we have a right shift in short-run aggregate supply, it's going to shift that direction, and it's going to be an increase in aggregate supply, just like when we talked about a right shift and regular old supply. And then a left shift is obviously going to be a decrease. So a short-run aggregate supply left shift is going to be a decrease in aggregate supply. All right, so we're going to fill this out in class. Please make sure if you miss this in class that you get it from somebody in class. And then the next video we'll be talking about long run. The only other thing that we need to talk about here is going to be examples. So after you have this all completed, I have four examples of changes in short-run aggregate supply for you to work through. So pause the video here, look at what you think is going to be the factor that is going to be used, and then draw what happens to the short-run aggregate supply curve. Okay, hopefully you tried this on your own. So number one says there is a decrease in the price of oil. So the factor is going to be the commodity prices. Commodity prices are going to be all of those things that go into making a particular product, those raw materials other than wages, obviously. So if the commodity prices decrease, this is going to be an increase in aggregate supply. Minimum wage increases. If the minimum wage increases, this is going to be nominal wages. So nominal wages are going to be a factor in aggregate supply. So if the nominal wages increase, then the short-run aggregate supply curve is going to move to the left. Number three says the new technology that makes things faster to produce. So the factor here is going to be productivity. So productivity, if it makes it better, easier to produce, the short-run aggregate supply curve will move to the right. And lastly, the price of corn increases. So the price of corn is considered a commodity. It's used in a lot of things, particularly now in energy costs, for example, ethanol. And so if the price of corn increases, our short-run aggregate supply curve will also shift to the left. How'd you do? Hopefully well. Let me know if you have any questions.